Hi guys, my name is Kelsey Irwin, and today we're going to talk about when an athlete chokes, who do they let down more, themselves or their teammates? So this brings us into the first part of choking. So what does choking mean in sports, and why does it happen? Athletes don't just decide that they want to choke under pressure or they want to perform at a lower level than possible. Studies have shown that when an athlete chokes, their attention becomes fixated on the wrong thing during high-pressure moments, as found in Kyriakorfis and Terry 2011. So this means that although athletes don't decide they want to choke, it's actually what they are focusing their attention on that is causing them to choke under pressure. Nieder's model of concentration describes how attentional style can be either internal or external and either broad or narrow. These four attentional styles are independent of one another and create four main styles: internal narrow, internal broad, external narrow, and external broad. But what does attentional styles have to do with choking? Like I said, although athletes don't decide they want to choke, it has been shown that when athletes choke, it is because their attention is fixed on the wrong thing during the wrong time. So the preferred attentional style is unique to each athlete dependent on their current skill level, meaning that elite players will not have the same skill level and same attentional style as novice players within the same sport. Castaneda and Gray 2007 looked at these two groups, elite and novice, to see what attentional style helped them reach their peak performance. They found that elite players, who were elite baseball players, focused externally and had a less focus on execution. Novice baseball players had an internal focus, which means they focused on skill execution. Baylock, Carr, McHonan, and Stark 2002 corroborated these findings by observing the same two groups, elite and novice players, but this time they looked at soccer players and compared them based off of a simple dribbling task. The elite players had focus on skill execution, and they found that to be debilitating, whereas novice players had the same attentional style that focused on skill execution or a narrow internal step-by-step focus, and that was found to be beneficial for them. So what this means is that elite players have the capability of having mastery within a skill. That's why they are called elite. When they are elite, we want them to perform from an autonomic athletic performance station. We don't want them to think step by step through as novices have to. We want our elite players to just almost do the movement without having to think about it. So if we know that there should be less focus on skill execution and we should allow for autonomic athletic movement, this means that when they have that internal focus, what's happening is they're blocking their natural ability and skill mastery from performing. Novice athletes need that narrow internal focus because they don't have that same mastery level with skills specific to their sport. So if elite athletes still choke and they have obtained skill mastery, why is that? Why does that happen? A study found that when anxiety was high, elite tennis players began to overthink their serves. This study by Englert and Odians 2014 found that athletes who are elite players and are relatively good servers, when pressure and anxiety was introduced, they began to overthink their serves or think step by step. This caused too much focus on task-related movements and decreased their ability to perform skills based off of memory. Going back to that autonomic athletic performance that we want our elite athletes to experience, these tennis players did not deal with anxiety correctly and their attentional focus shifted. U 2015 found that when large amounts of external pressures are present, athletes became largely distracted and placed their attention on task-irrelevant cues. So meaning there was a decrease in their working memory capacity and therefore less capability to use their memories to produce autonomic athletic performance. This means similarly to Englert and Odians 2014, U 2015 found that when distractions are present, even elite level athletes were not able to cope with that correctly and their attention shifted to something it should not have, such as task irrelevant cues, and this caused them to choke under pressure. As we've seen, even elite athletes are capable of choking when they don't have the correct coping style to deal with high pressure situations, anxiety, over-arousal, etc. When athletes are able to utilize a correct coping style and a correct coping strategy, they're able to keep their attention focused on what they should to perform to the best of their abilities. We're going to talk about two attentional styles today. We're going to talk about avoidance coping and problem-focused coping. because the important part of when an athlete chokes is how do they handle it? What do they do next? First up is avoidance coping. Avoidance coping is when athletes use distractions or ignore the problem at hand to get through it and to move on. In Wang, Market, and Morris 2014, avoidance coping athletes were found to actually perform well under pressure because they were able to manage their anxiety levels by avoiding the situation. Similarly, avoidance coping is shown to be useful for high-level athletes when they're faced with a stressor that cannot be changed, as found in Allen and Leary 2010. This means that when there is a distraction or a situation that an athlete has no control over, such as weather, change of venue, bad call in a sport, using an avoidance coping and ignoring it or moving past it by just letting go of it was actually found to be helpful. Additionally, avoidance coping allows novice athletes to move past mistakes via distraction or more emotion-focused avoidance like venting and using humor, as found in Giacobbe 4 and Weinberg 2004. This means that not only were athletes able to distract themselves and ignore the situation at hand, they also introduced an emotional response where they vented or used humor to help them move past the situation at hand. The second type of coping style is problem-focused coping. This is where athletes use a combination of tools specific to the task at hand to handle pressures by reframing, relying on emotional support, acceptance, planning, religion, and many more tools. By having a myriad of problem-specific coping skills on hand, the athlete is capable of feeling more control over the situation, and this allows them to view the stressor in a more positive light by directly attacking the stressor and finding a solution. Christiansen, Roberts, and Abrahamson, 2008, found that problem-focused coping combined with emotional coping was the most beneficial to athletes. What this means is that athletes who use problem-focused coping and emotion-focused coping were able to reframe a situation, attack the stressor head-on, but also introduce an emotional component that allowed them to maybe use humor, realize that their emotions are valid and okay in a situation in order to move on effectively. The interesting about both of those coping styles is that an emotional response was relevant to each of them in different ways. While avoidance coping and problem-focused coping have both been shown by studies to be effective for athletes moving past choking, the important part I want to focus on is the emotions that the athletes used within that and their perceptions. So how do emotions play a role? A study by Brandy, Brewer, and Topman, 2001, found that when athletes perceive there to be pressure from others to perform well, they are more likely to choke. This wasn't just onlooker pressures or pressure from parents or teachers, but moreover, it was social pressures and anxiety from teammates and coaches. So the ones who they wanted to perform best for were their teammates and their coaches. Martin, 2005, corroborated this by finding that athletes are more likely to choke in situations when they feel their teammates or coaches are placing high amounts of judgment or pressure on them. And additionally, a study by Doman, 2005, takes this even further by suggesting that not only does pressure to perform impact choking, again, it's specifically the pressure from friendly environments such as coaches and teammates that lead to choking. This is all coming from an athletic stance. So when an athlete chokes, they are saying that this is what they feel from others. They believe that their coaches and their teammates are judging them. They believe their coaches and teammates are placing high amounts of pressure on them to do well. And they feel when they don't perform, they're letting them down. But what do athletes think about themselves when they choke? After choking, individuals have reported feeling a loss of self-confidence and their ability to perform specific tasks and negative self-thoughts, as seen in Murayama, Sekiya, and Tanaka, 2010. Martin, 2015, found that athletes who choked felt feelings of negative self-emotions, such as shame, guilt, and embarrassment. And additionally, a study by Gomez, Avugos, Nora, Lorenzo, and Barelli, 2018, found that when athletes choke, they experience high levels of self-consciousness and a loss of self-efficacy in their ability to perform tasks. So, specifically in terms of their self-perception, athletes feel upset, they feel negative self-emotions like the shame, guilt, and embarrassment seen in Martin 2015, and they have a loss of self-efficacy, confidence, and they have an increase of self-consciousness, meaning that when an athlete chokes, they put a lot of pressure on themselves. So to tie it all together, we're going to talk about what the study moving forward is going to look like. Moving forward, I believe that there is plenty of research on choking in sports and how athletes use coping styles and how they feel and even how they believe teammates feel about them, but there's little to none on their self-perceptions of these emotions are realistic. So to reframe that, athletes think that their coaches and teammates are judging them and placing pressure on them to perform. But is this a misguided self-perception coming from a lack of self-confidence or another area that's lacking? Or are these thoughts actually true? This study will look at who really cares more that an athlete chokes, the athlete themselves or the teammates and coaches. The purpose of this study is to connect the dots between what athletes think and what is actually reality. So going back to what studies have shown athletes believe social pressures to be and what they believe their self-perceptions to be about themselves, who's putting more pressure on them, the athlete or the coaches and teammates? Using interviews, I hope to obtain the following: what emotions and thoughts athletes have about themselves when they choke, what emotions and thoughts athletes think their teammates and coaches have when they choke, and what emotions and thoughts teammates and coaches have when their athlete on their team chokes. So the study will take a qualitative approach, and all responses from the interviews will be coded to indicate if there are any recurring themes present in the data. I hypothesize based off previous research that athletes will place more pressure on themselves when they choke than their teammates and coaches. Additionally, I am hypothesizing that the perceptions of social pressure are more fictitious than realistic in terms of how teammates and coaches feel about an athlete when they choke. Thank you for listening to my research proposal, and here are my references from the studies mentioned.